I was trying to be nice. Chop, chop.
Got to stop this on the way.
Ephesians chapter 5 is where we're going to be again this morning. Before we get started, Brother Bill, will you open us in a word of prayer, please?
Father God, thank you, Lord, for loving us. I thank you for today. Bless us, God. I pray this morning that Brother Jack will give us what we need to hear this morning to help our lives to grow, Lord, in spirit and truth. Pray for those that are sick, Lord, for all those that have COVID and other things going on. Just pray, God, you bless and heal. In Jesus' name we pray.
Ephesians chapter 5, and we have gotten to the part that deals with the family, that deals with the home. And I'm just going to say this one more time. Who knows if it comes up again. But notice that long before you get to verse 21, verse 22, verse 25, all of these verses that deal with the home, there is a prerequisite. And that prerequisite comes back in verse 18. And be not drunk with wine wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit. This is a picture of what the results of being filled with the Spirit are. In fact, Brother Bill, remember there were three things. First, there's your relationship here. Okay, there's not going to be singing and making melody in the heart instead of guilt and hiding and living in darkness and deception. Then there's your relationship here. And then there was your relationship here. And the relationship here goes to that picture of submitting one to another. Now, what does that look like? And it goes from verse 21, what does it look like to submit one to another? And Bruce begins to paint the picture of what it looks like in the home. But all of this still ties and flows out of Ephesians 5:18. And one of the great challenges with jumping to this passage, and if you go to a marriage seminar at some point, you're going to go to Ephesians chapter 5. You're going to be looking at verse 23. You're going to be looking at verse 25. But one of the great challenges, if you look at any of those verses without going to 5:18, you have a problem. Because it is not inside of man to do this. It is not inside of man to surrender, to submit. We don't like it. America exists because we weren't going to bow to a king. It is the attitude that we push into every child, and then we wonder why they don't want to submit to a father, because they don't submit to the teacher, and we just don't like to submit. But the entire Christian life is about submitting, and it starts as a result from submitting to the Spirit. Now, that being said, we're going to jump right into the middle, which is kind of where we left off, I believe, last week. And I'm going to do this. I don't know if there is a single topic that has been written about more than the home. Now, before, when you could walk into a Christian bookstore, they don't really exist anymore. But before, when you could walk in, close to a third of that bookstore would be on the home. Of some form or fashion, a third of that bookstore would be on the home. And there would be new books. Now, realize a decade before that, a third of that bookstore was on the home, and they were new books. And a decade before that, a third of that bookstore was full of books on the home, and they were new books. It is such a covered institution of God, but yeah, we still struggle with it so much. It has been said, and I'm going through here, I just want to teach this as a Sunday school class. It's not a marriage seminar. I tried that when I was a kid. I read every book I could, underlined it, and started telling my dad how he was supposed to be, and my mom how she was supposed to be. It didn't work too well, but I learned a lot. But it has been said that young people today are resistant to enter into marriage, this is a direct quote, because of the failures they have seen at their home. And there's probably some truth to that. The result is that this generation is redefining relationships. They're redefining value. In fact, they're going so far as to even redesign what man and woman are. Okay. Society, our society, the place and time in which we live, which, Brother Bill, it's the place and time in which God placed us. There's a reason for this. But our society has come to the conclusion that every person on earth is incompatible with every other person on earth. And if they come together, it's just a matter of time before you either separate or you stay together and you stay miserable. Now, I'm going to tell you, there's part of that I agree with. I believe every person on earth is incompatible with every other person on earth. It's called the sin nature. It is not natural for us to love. It is not natural for us to care. Okay? God is love, And loving is a fruit of the Spirit. Okay? It should be natural for a Christian to love. It should be natural for a Christian to forgive. It should be natural for a Christian to be long-suffering. Go through Corinthians chapter 13, and you know everything that you're going to read in there that we're supposed to do. This is what love looks like. These are the actions of love, Brother Hank. If you go through there and read all those, you're going to find all of those are covered in the fruit of the Spirit. It should be natural for us. But it is, the natural man in his flesh is selfish. So there's a part of that I agree is probably some truth. After all, that's where we are in Ephesians 5. First, it's full of the Spirit. Before you look at the home, this is the picture of what the home full of the Spirit looks like. Now, what ends up is we start looking for reasons to separate. It's inevitable. You're a man, you're a woman, you've grown up in a different home, you have different views, different desires, and so you begin to look for reasons to separate. Well, that's part of the problem with this society. We shouldn't be looking for reasons to separate. We need to look for reasons to stay together. And we're going to talk about two of them, if I get going, this morning. The first reason is found in its foundation. The foundation of marriage gives us one of the great reasons to stay together. Back in Genesis chapter 1, can't get any more foundational than Genesis chapter 1. Last week we looked at Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. And God said, I just want you to listen to all the plural pronouns. And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them. Well, that's a puzzling them. Lorraine, who is the them? God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them. Well, there are some who are going to say this them is the first man and all men who come after him. So it's all just tied to men. And so that actually makes sense if you stopped reading. But keep reading. And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. The image of God created he him, male and female. Now there's who the them is. Them is man and woman. And what purpose did he create them for? What did he create woman for? He did not create her to wash the clothes, cook the food, and make you happy. All those things are wonderful. They would be acts of love. They would show reverence. Those are great things. But from the Miss Lorraine, from the very beginning, you were created to have dominion and rule with man over the whole earth. He created them to have dominion over every creeping thing. It was created for together rule. There's no difference in value. Now you can go to chapter 2, and there is difference in rule from the beginning. This didn't happen from the fall, which is why we went to Genesis chapter 2 last week. It's not the result of the fall. But Brother Hank, together, them. No, we messed that up. Man messed it up. Through the fall, through sin, there wasn't dominion. But from the very beginning, Brother Bill, this is just great. You know, from the very beginning, what he planned on doing? He planned on redeeming. Before there was man, there was a plan. We didn't shock God with the fall. Before there was man, there was a plan to redeem man. The plan was this: I'm going to need a bride for my son. I'm going to send him to redeem or to purchase this bride. And then he and this bride are going to sit on the throne and rule and reign with me. Now there's the picture of the church right there. Don't believe? Go to Revelation chapter 3, I think it's verse 17, where it says the bride's going to sit on the throne with him. That is the picture of the church. Brother Hamilton, the church is going to reign. I don't understand that. I'm certainly not worthy to sit on the throne. But that's the plan. Now, here's the picture from the very beginning. And here's one of the reasons. That was God's purpose from the very beginning, Brother Bill. It is his purpose to use that picture in the home to show who God is. We're going to read this passage. This passage is going to give us two clear pictures. You're a man. You are portraying the role of Christ in this redemption picture. Your wife, a woman, she is portraying the role of the church. Just as Christ provides for the church, just as the church is submissive to Christ, just as it shows that picture of together and the purpose of ruling, that picture is how the world is supposed to see him. Remember 1 John chapter 2, no man has seen God at any time? How does the world get to see him? Bible says, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men to me. Brother Hank, you know I love that verse. Well, how are they supposed to see him? Here's our cop-out. Well, you know, that verse in Psalms, they're supposed to see him in his creation. They're supposed to see him in your marriage. It's supposed to be different. It's supposed to show forth Christ and the church and the bride united. When we start looking at the home, you know, we start arguing about, well, Brother Jeremy, you just don't know how Brother Wayne treated me. And Brother Wayne, well, you just don't know she just ignored me. I don't blame you. I try to do the same thing sometimes. But it's hard. He doesn't let you go. It's not about you, and it's not about Brother Wayne. He has chosen for you to represent the bride and Brother Wayne to represent Christ. And we have a huge responsibility in the world where he's placed us. That is one of the reasons that men need to be men and women need to be women. Now, that being said, it gets up to this ugly word. I think it's a beautiful word, a scary word, but in our society, it's an ugly word. We'll start reading in verse 23. For the husband is the head of the wife, and here's the word. It's that word headship. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of church, for he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be subject unto their own husbands in everything. We're going to look quickly at this picture of headship. But before I want to ask this question, because this is what we do. Brother Hank, you know, we like to compare, we like to compete. So I think about, you know, women and men. I want to compare. Do you think the bigger problem is that men are failing in their headship or that women are failing in their fellowship? No, that really is a good question. Okay, because if you ever talk to individual marriages that are struggling, okay, here's an easy answer. Well, if you've ever listened to John R. Rice in your life, every single sermon he finds a way to say, everything rises and falls on leadership. Well, if everything rises and falls on leadership, the problem would be the headship. Or you could just look at this passage. Look at this passage. You realize there's 3 verses dedicated towards women? There's 9 verses dedicated towards men. 3 times the amount. And you could go on and on and on. Brother Hank, I clearly believe that the problem is with men. Okay. However, and you might agree right now, but I'm going to tell you, if you came to me, talk to me about, we're just struggling. Everything you're going to tell me, you're struggling. Why? Well, because Miss Debbie is, and Miss Debbie is, and Miss... That's what happens. Do 2 minutes of marriage counseling, and that's where you're going to see. It's very easy to sit right here and say, Brother John, men need to be men. But men find excuses not to. And they blame it on the woman. And you know where that started? When Adam was faced with a question and said, it's the woman you gave me. And I'll tell you something. Struggle. If you read any Hebrew scholar, every single Hebrew scholar is going to tell you that Adam was right there with Eve. Everyone is going to say they were right there. What did Adam do to intervene? Nothing. He was passive. He sat there quiet. He watched the whole thing. He joined in. Sometimes we make him, oh, he loved her so much. He wanted to go to the same place she was. There's probably some truth to that. That's our definition of love. Because if he really loved her, he would have intervened. She was sitting there talking, fellowshipping with evil. She was listening to Satan. She was hanging around the tree, tempting herself. No, I do not like the clock. When we begin to look at this picture of the role of a man, man is to lead. It is headship, and he is to lead exactly that way, with his head. Now, this is what happens when we start talking about it. I'm telling you, this is what happens. Whatever, I'm old. Brother Bill, I've talked about this situation at my dining room table, at other people. I've talked about this more times than I can remember. And what always happens is somebody will say, well, I know my aunt and uncle who live out in Oklahoma, and they have egalitarian relationship. There's no headship, and it works. So, what do you say about that? Well, I say it's irrelevant. Miss Kathy, it doesn't matter. God created the home. God set the picture, and it breaks the picture. The home's purpose, a great purpose of the home, is to show forth the love of Christ to the world. That means the headship of Christ and the submission of the church. And if you break the mold, you break the purpose. You are not fulfilling your purpose. If you ask me, what is your greatest fear in life? Well, I got to tell you, after the fear of going to hell, if I really think about it, it's going to be this, that I don't live up to what God called me to be, and that's a man. If I don't live out to be the male role he's called me to be, because he's placed so much responsibility there. It affects all those who watch. It affects my children. It affects my wife. It will affect the next generation. And then, I would not get into this argument, not at first, to be honest. But I'm not going to get into the argument of whether it's truly egalitarian. I'm going to tell you, this whole world is full of authority. There's authority. Everywhere you go, there's authority. You walk into a store, there's an owner of that store. Guess how you have to act or you're going to be removed. Everything is full of authority. And we decide whether we're going to rebel and blame against that authority or we're going to submit and trust in that authority. The Christian life is all about submission. It's all about authority. We submit to Christ. We submit to the Word. We submit to God. In the Word, it tells us to submit to government. We submit to those laws. Imagine what driving would be if there were no laws. We have laws, and exactly. Here you go. There you go. Brother Wayne, I'm going to just go for a drive. Let's go for a ride. It'd be bad today. I got the Cadillac. So this is what happens. I just see that stop sign. I kind of look. Nobody's coming. I just drive right through it. Well, you're going to lecture me. Brother Jeremy, you shouldn't drive through that stop sign. Right? Good guy. I'm going to tell you, I have a brother. He doesn't stop at anything. He doesn't stop for any lights. He stops for nothing. So every time I come up to a light, you're going to get nervous. So I'm going to be driving along, just right there. I'm going to enjoy you being nervous too, by the way. I kind of like that. I'm going to come up to a light. It's a green light. Guess what I'm going to do at the green light? I'm going to stop. Everybody behind me is going to squeal. You're going to look over me. What are you doing? You know what I'm doing? I'm stopping because my brother might be coming. That's what happens without authority. It's just a mess. We have authority in our government. We have authority in the church. We have authority with our masters. That's the role at work. Now, we're doing everything we can. Skill pass seminars. There's no bosses. There's team building skills. We're doing everything we can to take out hierarchy. But let me tell you, somebody's got to be responsible. And everybody wants the role of telling somebody what to do. Nobody wants the responsibility. It's a virtue one in life, probably. I remember, it's like 1987, 1988. A U.S. cruiser in the Gulf shot down an Iranian private plane, passenger plane. But Bill, you remember that? Well, let me tell you what happened. What happened is the officer in charge of saying fire got faulty information from those underneath him. But now you know whose job it was to train them? It was his. And you know what happened? He lost his commission and was put out. Now we look at that and say, oh, that's harsh. No, but that's fair because look at what his action cost. We all want to tell everybody how things should be done. But let me tell you, there's a great responsibility that comes with authority. And that's what headship is. Man, you're like, I don't want that. I don't blame you. But God didn't ask us if we wanted it. He says you have it. Now what are you going to do with it? Because you're going to be accountable for it. But when you have it, Miss Tammy doesn't give it to me. Miss Tammy wasn't supposed to give it to you. God did. What are you doing with it? Let me do this because I want to get on to the next point. They have to go together. But one of the great ties to leading with our headship. But Hamilton, you realize leading with your head, you got to be going somewhere. You have to be accomplishing something. Rob, I've read a lot of books on this. Going all the way back to where I was like 12 trying to tell my dad how to be a dad. Which I did. I underlined all of them, put it on the coffee table. They all ended up back in my room on my bed. But every one of them you read, you're going to find out that one of the great complaints of women is that the man is passive. He's disengaged. He comes home, vents a little bit, goes in his room. These days, he'd be getting on a game or getting on the phone or doing wraps up in his show. He has no idea what's going on with the kids or the bills or the house, or he's totally disengaged. And the only time he enters into the relationship of the home is when he has pressure to do something that he feels is only because other people, failed. So I've got to come up and I've got to save the day. Or when he feels disrespected, then he comes out of his cave, he barks and bellows, only to go back in and wonders why there's not good fellowship. He's not engaged. He's passive. And this ties all the way back to Adam, to that same picture. What, Miss Cassie, you know what we said Adam was? Standing by doing nothing. Uninvolved. While the most important thing in human creation was going on. That decision was happening, and he was standing there watching it. Children are growing up. Wives are struggling. And many men are being passive, standing in the back. I'll say this too. I'm going to turn. Hebrews chapter 13. I just want you to understand this is held for every position of authority has some accountability. Brother Bill, you know what you and I are supposed to do? We're to submit to the pastor. That's what it says right here. Hebrews 13, verse 17, obey them that have the rule over you. Submit yourselves. Now look at what it says, why? For they watch for your souls as those that must give an account. Matt, I understand why you might not want that position. The world for decades has been full of men who are vacating that position. Doesn't change the fact that you and I are going to have to give an account for that position. Because he's put us in there. Now, the question becomes, okay, so how do we carry out this? How do we carry out this headship thing? Because, when you start talking about it, when you start talking about Miss Tammy sitting right there, oh, Brother Jeremy, why you say that to Wayne? I feel you, Miss Tammy. Nobody likes submission. But he just didn't leave this as an open-ended picture. He tells us how we're supposed to lead. Husbands, love your wives. Well, right there. This is how we lead. Okay, we use our heads in our headship, but we lead by loving with our hearts. And it gives us 6 different pictures of what this love looks like. I'm probably going to run out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and say this. Somebody asked me last week, and if he was here, I think he would handle this with grace, but I'm not looking at him, and he's not here. So, boom, if he hears, I don't believe there'd be a problem. But Brother Billy came up to me afterwards, and he asked me this. He said, Brother Jeremy, I know somebody who does this. You have to love as you would love yourself, and you get that whole picture. And okay, well, anytime that comes up, you talk about how he's supposed to love his wife or his kids, or his answer is, I love hard because I love myself hard. Well, that's a nice, cute little excuse of an answer, except for we don't get to define what love is. Brother Hamilton, he says right here, you lead by loving your wife, and he's going to go on and show us a picture of what that is. We don't get to say, well, I love her hard because that's how I love me. In fact, love is of God. It's not of man. And he's about to paint a picture of what it looks like. And the first thing he gives us is husbands, love your wives. It's a singular love. The love for the wife is different than the love or the submission for everyone else. Matt, I am not accountable for everyone else, but I am accountable for my home. And I'm supposed to affect that home by the way that I love. And then it gives this other picture, husband, love your wives. Well, you have to go back to the very beginning. You know what he called them? Husbands. Brother Hamilton, today that just means the man that I'm married to. But that is not the word husband. Husband is a very special word. It goes all the way back to the garden, to be the husbandman of the garden. In John chapter 15, Christ would say, I'm the vine and the Father is the husbandman. A husband is one who cares for the garden. It's a planter. It's a cultivator. It's one who is nourishing, who labors to produce good fruit, to produce beautiful fruit. Brother Allen, he says, Allen, be the husband. Labor for your wife. Cultivate the home. Provide a safe place. For years I tried to grow tomatoes in the backyard. I did. I would plant these little seeds, and I'd get them to grow up, and they'd start to grow just a little bit, and I'd be all excited, and I'd put this stuff around them so all the little aphids and things couldn't get to them, and they would start to grow. They'd get about that big, and I'd be like, I'm going to have tomatoes in like 3 months, but I'd be all excited, and the first rain that came, you know what would happen to those plants? And if the rain didn't come and beat them down and drowned them, the sun would kill them. I mean, they needed water in the middle of the day, and if you watered them before the middle of the day, they need water all the time. Well, Matt, you know what I learned? I bought this little thing. Angie bought it for me. She got tired of me failing, so she was help me and said, try this, bonehead. I know she said the bonehead part up here. We married a long time. So she bought me this little feeder thing, it's supposed to grow herbs and stuff. Well, I dumped the seed out, and I put my tomato seeds in there. Let that thing start growing until it got to be like this big. Because it's a safe environment. It has the perfect amount of water. It has the perfect amount of food. Miss Kathy, that thing just grew. It got that thick, and it was a foot tall. It got to the point where I could raise the little light up as far as it would go, and now the leaves were starting to burn, so I had to plant it outside, and I was like, but that thing was strong enough this time when I planted it outside. It's this tall now. It's got all these little baby tomatoes all over the place. But Hank, that's what you're supposed to do for your wife. You provide a safe, nourishing environment, an environment that she can grow and flourish. Now, who doesn't want to be in that? It's not some power over, get me my sandwich. He paints this picture of this singular love. And there's no domination, there's no thumb over. In fact, the comparison is Christ to the church. How does Christ love the church? Bruce, how many times does he put the thumb over you? No. He wants volunteers. He wants us to love him. You know what he does? He creates a safe, nourishing environment for us to grow up. And when we step outside, he pursues us to bring us back into a safe, nurturing environment with long suffering and with grace and with tenderness. Well, you just don't know how bad my wife is. I almost said wench. Why? Because that's what you have to do. You have to make somebody bad. That's what you do. How do you justify treating your wife poorly? You have to make her deserve it. What ugly thoughts get in there? It's definitely not the husbandman. You want to take a picture? You read the book of Hosea, where you see, go and marry a prostitute, marry a harlot. That's not me. You don't know how many times we've turned our back on God, how many times we've taken the reins ourselves, how many times we tried to do it our way. Well, every one of those is the time we turned away from the Lord, just like she turned away from her husband. You read the book of Hosea. You know what he said? Go get her. Go get her. Go buy her back. Some of the crazy things we do to justify divorce. Go get her. So first it's this servant single love. I'll say this too. I don't have any time. I'm running out of time. You know, sometimes we think this. Brother Wayne, you'll think, well, you know what? We need to send Miss Tammy to all kinds of Bible seminars so she learns to love better. I'm going to tell you, we need to learn. His ways are not our ways. I think this challenges us all the time. But I think love is one of those things that's not so much just learned. It's more like a magnet. It's passed on. Brother Hank, you create that loving environment, and you know what love demands? It demands love back. It builds love back. Take some iron, put it on a magnet for a very long period of time. You know what that iron is now? It's magnetized. And the longer it's in contact, the stronger the magnetism. Miss Kathy, I think teaching is invaluable. But I think the greatest teaching was when we got to see Christ's love. And who portrays the role of Christ in the home? Oh, that's right, Brother Moyer. It's you and me. And we have to example that love. And when we example that love, you know what love demands and brings in return? Husbands, love your wives, even as. This goes back to one of the English words. Remember, you had metaphors and similes. Similes used like or as. It's an obvious comparison using the words like or as. Well, here's the comparison. As Christ. So, Brother Bill, this is where it starts to get serious. How did Christ love? The greatest act of love in history. The most sacrificial act ever. Brother Hank, is what he used to paint the picture of how you're supposed to think and care for Miss Debbie. Now, whatever we try to justify outside of that, we're blowing smoke and wasting our time. The manner in which we carry out this singular love is supposed to be expressed in the same picture, in the same manner, where Christ sacrificed himself for us on the cross. But why did he go to the cross? For God so loved. He was motivated by his love for the individual. You know what's so bad about wench? Well, that word is just terrible. No, what's terrible is that kills love. That kills the motivation. We deceive ourselves. We walk in darkness. And we justify terrible, ungodly behavior towards the one God put underneath us and holds us accountable for. How do we justify anger, blowing up, demeaning, cussing out? Ignoring. Well, I don't do any of those. Ignoring. Do you think we have a passive God who stands in the back and is not involved in our lives? Is that the picture of God you have? I'm running out of time. Brother Hank, this will be easy on the test, right? We should have sacrificial love. Yes? Easy. I got that right on the test every single time you put it in front of me. You're supposed to love Miss Debbie like Christ loves the church, yes? Get that one right on the test too. Okay, when was the last thing you sacrificed for Miss Debbie? When was the last time you just gave up time with the buddies or sports or a game just to listen to her life? Just to share. When was the last time you chose to value her and involve in her? Well, I didn't ask for anything hard. But Jeremy, how dare you say to me, I would take a bullet for Miss Debbie. Brother Hank, I would believe that. It's not asking you to take a bullet, it's asking you to live for Miss Debbie. If she felt like you were living for her, I really don't think there's much problem in fellowship. But if she feels like you're living for you, if you're taking care of you, she's got to take care of herself. What a broken picture. Reggie, I just don't feel like coming. I don't feel like listening to her. Okay, this is not an emotional love. It's volitional love. It's a choice. You have to make a choice. Christ, did you feel like leaving heaven, coming down here, walking through the mess of this earth, going through all the suffering on the cross? Did that just feel like the good thing to do? It was what he chose to do. Because he loved us. It doesn't always feel like the good thing. But it is always the good thing. When she starts to think you're doing the good thing because of your character, not because of something she did that got a response, she'll trust you more. have time. Let me just say that. When you begin to set, but Hank, just realize this. Was she supposed to, and she's supposed to? Well, let's not start talking about what she's supposed to. You're supposed to be the leader. You know what that means? That means you set the temperature. If you're forgiving, you're going to make it easier for your home to be a forgiving home. You need that too, by the way. It's two sinners come together. We need forgiveness in our home. If you're judgmental and condemning, guess what the temperature of that home is going to be? If you're a character person instead of a manipulative person, you set the condition, the temperature of the home. You lead, and there's fellowship. It's the picture. Now, next week we're going to look at dads before we move on to children and we move out of this passage. I think I read somewhere that 62 million people in America are fatherless. Yeah, there's a challenge. There's a problem. Brother Moore, you close in a word of prayer this morning.